Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a very special program hosted by the Archaeological Institute of America on International Archaeology Day. My name is Ben Thomas, and I'm the AIA's Director of Programs. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Archaeological Institute of America, AIA, is North America's oldest archaeological organization. And with over 200,000 supporting and subscribing members, it's also one of the largest in the world. From its founding in 1879, the AIA has been committed to supporting archaeology and archaeologists, publishing and disseminating the results of archaeological research, and providing programs like this one for a variety of audiences. You can learn more about us at www.archaeological.org. International Archaeology Day, IAD, is a global celebration of archaeology that we started about 12 years ago. IAD is officially observed each year on the third Saturday in October, but events are held throughout the month. Today, IAD is celebrated in over 30 countries, and every year, hundreds of organizations around the world host more than 1,000 public events that highlight archaeology, archaeologists, and the work that they do. This year, we're especially excited because after a 2-year hiatus due to the pandemic, organizations are once again holding in-person events around the world. You can find out more about IAD at www.archaeologyday.org. If you're not already a member of the AIA, I would suggest that you join as soon as possible. As a member, you will receive our award-winning archaeology magazine and be kept up to date with everything that we're doing. Find out about all our member resources and benefits at archaeological.org/join. All our programs are supported by our members and donors. To help us to continue providing programs like this one, please consider making a gift at archaeological.org/donate. So this program is a live presentation that is being recorded by the AIA. Recording by attendees is strictly prohibited. The AIA respects the intellectual property of its presenters and asks that you do the same. Thank you for your cooperation. So the program this afternoon, before I turn it over to our host and moderator, just to give you a rough idea of how the program will work, after my remarks, I will turn it over to our host who will introduce the panelists, and then we're going to have a conversation about the history of the Clotilda, the archaeology of the Clotilda, and hear from representatives of the descendant community. And then that'll be followed by a period for a conversation with the panelists, and then a Q&A with the audience. And then we'll conclude the program around 5 this evening. Eastern time. Now, the Q&A session, please enter any questions that you have for the panelists in the Q&A window in the Zoom webinar and not the chat window. There's going to be a lot of conversation in the chat window. And so we want to make sure that we get to your questions. So keep it separate and put it in that Q&A window, please. Okay, and now to the program itself. I'm very excited about today's program. We've been planning this for a while. I'm excited about today's program and the amazing people that have agreed to participate and share their knowledge and experience about this important and incredibly significant discovery. Your host and moderator for today's program is Dr. Alexandra Jones. Dr. Jones is Assistant Professor of Practice in History and Anthropology at Goucher College. She's also the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Archaeology in the Community. Dr. Jones has BAs and an MA from Howard University and an MA and PhD from UC Berkeley. She's been an educator for more than 18 years. Her current work focuses on African diaspora archaeology, community archaeology, and archaeology outreach. At Goucher, she also leads the Hallowed Ground Project, which studies and recognizes the role of slavery and racism in the history of the land the college currently occupies. Dr. Jones, thank you for joining us today and for agreeing to be our host and moderator.
Thank you, Ben. Well, happy International Archaeology Day to everyone. I'm very excited you could be here. I'm excited about the discussion and what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to start by introducing our panel. So if I could have everybody from our panel turn on your cameras, and we can start with Darren, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, how's everybody? I'm very humbled to have everyone here today. My name is Darren Patterson. I'm in Mobile, Alabama, and I am an African-American man, today wearing a black jersey with white lettering, sitting in my office here in Mobile. I am the recently past president of the Clotilda Descendants Association for the last 3 years. We've recently had elections that now will bring a new regime, but it won't change the mission, which is to make sure that the world never forgets the plight and the struggles of the 110, the people that were in the cargo hold of the Clotilda. What we do here is make sure that their stories live, that they live forever. They were remarkable people in that ship. And the Clotilda Descendants Association is making sure that we make the connections with those people now with the present so that they are not forgotten. And we'll talk more about that as we go on, but I'm very proud to be here, very proud to have all of you here.
Stacy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Stacy Hawthorne. I am a female Caucasian. I'm wearing a black shirt with gray and beige stripes, and I am in my home office. I'm the state archaeologist with the Alabama Historical Commission, and state archaeologist for the state of Alabama, working with the Alabama Historical Commission. We are the agency who has the stewardship under law for all cultural resources, shipwrecks, archaeological sites in state waters, which gives us the stewardship of the vessel, the Clotilda vessel itself, and the responsibility for the interpretation. However, I've had the privilege of working with Africatown for decades now, getting Africatown on the National Register and working on the history of the community and the sites that help tell that story.
Jim.
Hi, everybody. I'm James Delgado. I am the principal investigator for the Clotilda Shipwreck Project and have been so since 2018. I'm the senior vice president of Search Inc., the largest cultural resources management company in the US, but have been working in the field for 44 years, which explains why this white-haired Caucasian male wearing a black turtleneck is here. It's because of those years of experience. Clotilda is probably, it is actually the most profound shipwreck I have been privileged to work on, primarily because of its context, but also and powerfully because it has a descendant community. Many of the shipwrecks I've worked on have had, of course, members of families, particularly with lost warships and other crews. Clotilda, because it is all of that, but also a crime scene, has, I think, really given this project the type of weight that I feel very privileged to be working on as part of a really talented group of team members who have grown into the dozens now, as well as all of the partners that we engage with and have worked with powerfully, the Alabama Historical Commission, and also, of course, the descendants.
And I will be moderating the discussion that we'll have this afternoon as we go through. I'm Alexandra Jones, an African-American female wearing a white shirt. I'm in my home office with a bookshelf behind me. So what I would like to do is just kind of talk about all of the history behind the Clotilda, because I think many people have heard the name of the ship, but don't really understand the story behind it and its connection to Africatown and its larger connection to the transatlantic slave trade. So Darren, would you mind kind of walking us through a brief history of Africatown Clotilda and how it came to be?
And first of what I'd like to do is make sure that people understand the Atlantic slave trade, that goods and goods were sent from America to England. Okay, and England was industrialized, and they turned those goods into different types of things that they also sent to Africa. And in that, the Dahomey warriors there, who were very, very ruthless people, enslaved their enemies. Many of their enemies happened to be the ancestors of my people here in Mobile and around the country. So with that, the enslaved people were sent back to the Americas. It was a vicious triangle. Timothy Mayer, who you see on the screen, was an enslaver here in Mobile. He was a very rich man. He had designs on being the leader of the country, not just the South. Timothy Mayer wanted to be, for lack of a better word, the man. He wanted to be the person that pulled all of the strings, and he wanted to make sure that enslaving Africans was something that was a way of life. He sent and commissioned Clotilda to sail to the western part of Africa and bring back enslaved people. It was all to settle a bet, because enslaving Africans had been illegal for more than 50 years. But he decided that he was so smart and so bright and was so powerful that he could get Clotilda back to America under the noses of the authorities. So he commissioned Captain William Foster, his friend from Maine, to sail. And they went and got a cargo of people. And I use the word cargo, you know, in the most, how can I put it? It was not cargo. They were people. They were people. And in his finite wisdom, Mr. Mayer thought that the best thing he could do was get that load of people here and then enslave them. Clotilda had them packed in like sardines, butt naked, on a 2-month journey, having to sleep where they crapped, eat where they crapped, only allowed on deck for 1 day a week so their muscles wouldn't atrophy. Because at that point, they wouldn't have been any good to the people that were coming here. Once Clotilda finally made it to its destination, they were offloaded to a steamship and then on to the island where they were stashed, because the feds had gotten wind of the scheme. Matter of fact, at that time, it was so arrogant that it was even in the papers that Timothy Mayer had succeeded in doing what he needed to do to bring this cargo here. That's how arrogant it was. That's how elitist it was back in 1859 when all this was going on. Once they got to the island, it was the first time they had gotten close in 2 months. Now, the one thing that is important to know is that Timothy Mayer grossly underestimated the people in that cargo hold. They were very intelligent people, much more intelligent than he had told the people here they were. So the people in America thought that these people were supposed to be enslaved. They should have been enslaved. They were less than who we are. We have we had a physician in Mobile, Alabama named Dr. Josiah Knott, brilliant physician, very idiot of a man. He told people that the enslaved people, and he published this, were cut below dogs. They were okay to be enslaved. And the people fed into that. And they believed Dr. Knott. And those are the beginnings of things that started what's happening and what went on to be tradition and custom in America, that enslaved people were supposed to be here to serve white people. That was the beginning of how this started. So they were enslaved for 5 years after they got here, because they were told that we're going to give you a better life. And that better life was working from sun up to sundown, 6 days a week, working in cotton fields. In South America, some worked in the sugarcane fields, all because they wanted to make sure that the enslavers, the English, the wealthy, all had fine clothes to wear, hence cotton. All had sugar in their coffees, hence sugarcane cultivation in the fields in the South Americas. And I contend that they had no clue how resilient these people were. Because after 5 years of emancipation, they kept their customs. They kept their customs. They did not forget where they came from. And when they said, okay, Mr. Mayor, can you give us a ship to go home? He's like, nope, can't do that. Well, what about, can you give us some land to build our homes on? Nope, can't do that either. Well, what about this? Can we work for you? Can we work and make money and build our own homes? Oh yeah, you can do that. You can do that. So they built their own homes. They got land, built their own homes. And remember, these people were truly, truly remarkable people. They built their own homes, established a community. I have my treasurer, my former treasurer, when I was the president of the association, Bill Green and I used to walk the halls of Mobile County Training School, along with people like Cleon Jones, a noted athlete from the community, Anderson Flynn. These are all people in the communities now who know that we weren't far removed from being raised by generations not far removed from those ancestors of ours. So we pretty much live through them now. The spirit of the ancestors now live in us. They built a school. They built a school in 1880, Mobile County Training School. And they taught the Africans how to walk, how to talk, how to be in their new country, what they needed to be to survive. I can remember walking the halls of Mobile County Training School and seeing somebody like Mr. Alfred July, 6'6" of him, teaching young men how to walk straight, how to shake a man's hand with conviction, how to look a man in the eyes. These were things that the young Africans were taught. Because remember, there were Africans already here who had been born into slavery because it had been illegal to import Africans here for 50 years. So there were Africans already here. And they made fun of the new Africans from the Clotilda. They made fun of because of the way they talk, the way they act. And there were Africans here who made fun of them. So the school itself, which is a Rosenwald School, talk about that a little bit later, was built to teach the Africans how to be viable young men and women. It was a great place to be. It was a great school to go to. It was a great community to grow up in. And so as they went forward from the school and were taught to go out into the world, they learned so many things, Next slide, please. Africatown. They couldn't go home. This was their home. Next slide, please. The cemetery that we now are desperately and feverishly working to bring back to a pristine condition is where those old Africans now are buried, and some of their children. And all of their headstones face east because they always wanted to return home to the east. I'm told that they counted the sunrises. They knew that they had at least 60 sunrises to get back home. My money would have been on them. If they had been given a ship, my money would have been on them to get back home. So as they stayed in this community, worked in this community, died in this community, it was part of everything they were. Next slide, please. When Clotilda was found in the Mobile River, it was an amazing day. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was like a festival. It was like, we always knew that Clotilda existed, but it was something that you couldn't talk about because people did not want you to talk about the ship. There was an attempt to destroy this ship after they had offloaded them, to burn the ship. Clotilda has been hiding in plain sight for 162 years. I'll let Dr. Delgado talk to that. For 162 years. And I'm proud that when we went to the site of Clotilda and sat on top of where the site was, next slide, please. It was the first time that a Lewis, that's Gary Lumbers on the left, Mike Foster in the middle, he is a descendant of Captain William Foster, and me on the right, a descendant of Cooper Lee, Polly Allen. It was the first time an Allen, a Lewis, and a Foster had been on that very site above Clotilda for the first time in 162 years. In a nutshell, there's so much more to the story, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here. Okay? Thank you much.
Thank you for that. So I'd just like to ask one quick question for clarification and just to make sure that everybody understands. You mentioned when they were offloaded from the ship, destruction happened. So could you talk a little bit about what actually happened to the ship? Were they actually trying to destroy the ship so that no one wouldn't know about it? Or did something naturally happen to the ship?
Remember, importing Africans for the purpose of enslaving them had been illegal for 50 years. The penalty was death. There was one captain that was actually caught and hanged, the captain of the Erie. The reason that they tried to destroy Clotilda was because if Captain Foster or Mr. Mayer, any of their cronies had been found, they could have possibly been hanged, okay? Now they were put on trial, but Captain Foster was Mr. Mayer and Captain Foster, they all hooked up, for lack of a better word, that there's no way that they were going to be found guilty by a jury of their peers, okay? So that was the big deal then, that they got off. They walked. They were actually put on trial, but they could not be found guilty because of lack of evidence. No Clotilda. Until now.
Okay. So Dr. Delgado, can you give us just a little bit of background about the illegal slave trade that was taking place in this region post 1880, just so that we have more of a background from a maritime perspective?
Certainly. The transatlantic trade in human captives, of course, dates back centuries. And most of those who were transported did come from Africa, both to South America, into the Caribbean, but also into North America. The United States began to respond to abolition concerns that were also rising elsewhere in the world with laws that initially stopped the importation of people from other countries. But the actual trade itself was made illegal in an act of Congress in 1807. And with that, starting in 1808, the transportation of people for the purposes of selling them into enslavement was illegal and a crime which in a decade or so would become punishable by death. That captain that was hanged, however, did not get hung until the Civil War. Up until that time, juries regularly looked the other way, and many people were complicit, including US government officials. The illegal trade, such as it was, largely centered on Spanish vessels working out of the coast and coming to Cuba. Cuba was situated in a perfect place, if you will, if such a term could be used, because it had proximity to the Gulf Coast, whether into the Florida Keys or up into other parts of Florida or along the various bayous and the intricate waterways of the Gulf Coast in northern Florida, in Louisiana, in Alabama, and even into Texas. Up to 786,000, no more people are known to have been brought illegally, as well as against their will, into what would be the United States Gulf Coast. That doesn't include those who remained in Cuba. That doesn't include those who were transported elsewhere. Anti-slavery patrols mounted by different governments attempted to stop that trade, including those on the coast, but captures were rare until increased pressure began after the 1820s and up to the time of the Civil War. We suspect that in that annual transport of anywhere from between 3,500 to as many as 14,000 people each year in that decadal span from 1808 to 1863, that there may have been more that simply weren't registered or didn't get caught. And in that, again, we're reminded of why archaeology can make a difference. And that is because that which is written down, that which is agreed upon as a written record, oftentimes needs to be checked with the archaeological or the forensic record. And with that, up until recently, many people believed that the Wanderer, which was captured by an anti-slavery patrol, was indeed the last vessel to have engaged in the trade. But then there's Clotilda. And to that end, while Clotilda is the last known ship to have brought people to the United States for the purposes of enslaving them, it may not have been that. But what is important for us archaeologically is that this is the first time we actually have one of these vessels which has survived as an archaeological site that is so incredibly intact that there is no confusion as to what it is or how it was used.
Thank you for that. It brings up one question that jumps out to me before we continue in talking about what the penalty is. And also listening to Darren, you saying that this was actually boasted upon. So this was a well-known crime that was committed. Did anything actually happen to Captain Foster or Timothy Mayer? Were either one of them convicted of this crime or even put up for trial for this crime?
No, they weren't convicted. They did go on trial, but you know, who's going to convict them? A panel of other enslavers or enslavers sympathizers? I mean, who's going to convict them? It was common practice at that time. Enslaving Africans was common practice. There are so many families right now in Mobile, Alabama, who are rich because of what their ancestors did in the slave trade. And we'll talk about that later too, because the silence you hear in Mobile, Alabama is deafening from those families because they know exactly what their descendants did, what their ancestors did. And now it's becoming so, what is the right word? It's becoming such a major part of the discussion to talk about reparations. And those are things that those families, I contend, are very concerned with.
Thank you.
Alexandra, I'll just add on to that to say that the key word here is complicity. There was increasing pressure politically, even in Congress and in state legislatures, to overturn the 1807 Act. And in 1855, William Yancey did argue in legislative session that the time had come to just start directly importing people from Africa because it had gotten so expensive to bring people down from up north. And with that, I think we do need to just pause for a quick second and remind everybody that what remained legal not only was the crime of enslaving people itself, but also the so-called domestic trade. And in that, you look at sites in my own backyard, which I think you and I both have visited, Alex, that, you know, the Henson House, where people were sold down the river. And that is where that phrase comes from, where people who had ancestors who had been enslaved and were in the northern states, as well as some of the other southern states like Maryland, could be sold south to feed the demand for people to deal with the cotton and the sugarcane economy in the Gulf. And with that, so many more were either marched in coffles or taken by ships, legally licensed, regulated slave ships that would sail out of Baltimore and Richmond and other ports and take people down there. And anybody that's seen the film adaptation of 12 Years a Slave sees Mr. Northrop actually in one of those types of vessels. So that's all happening. And that needs to also be talked about. But back to Foster and Mayer, they laughed about this. Everybody was their friend. Prominent others had invested in this crime. And ultimately, when the judge ordered the marshal to go out and take a look, the slaveholding marshal, Cade Godbold, couldn't see anything. And we'll get back to this in a little bit. As Darren said, this wreck was hidden in plain sight. But ultimately, the only crime that Foster was convicted of, and he paid a $1,000 fine, or at least he was told to pay the fine, was for not filing his paperwork when he returned from his voyage and had broken the customs laws. But again, let's also remind people that this tugboat, the steam tug that pulled Clotilda up the Spanish River to dock with the steamboat Czar and transfer the captives, was named for the federal judge, Billy Jones, Jr. in Mobile. A lot of folks, as Darren said, were in on this.
Thank you for that. So what I'd like to do is actually turn to both you and Stacy and talk about the archaeology that's taking place. And we can also see this story from an archaeological standpoint to kind of bring it into contemporary times.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Is our presentation? I was waiting for our presentation to come up, but thank you. So as I stated before, my office has been involved for years looking for the Clotilda and with the Africatown community. Even before I was employed with the Historical Commission, there were searches to look for the Clotilda. And Foster said that he sank the Clotilda in Bayou Connaught. And so there had been remote sensing surveys in all of Bayou Connaught before I even worked for the Historical Commission. Those were permitted and monitored by the Historical Commission and funded by them through a grant program. They came out negative. And so, you know, we've been also, I mentioned when I came on board, let's see, it was 98, but in 2010, we began working with Africatown. And that's when I became really familiar with the story of Clotilda and the descendants, the survivors, the community. We worked to put the Africatown on the National Register, to do terrestrial archaeology in the community, looking for the locations that the ancestors lived, and to work with the community members, as Darren mentioned, on the cemeteries. So, but this latest, I suppose the identification of Clotilda itself came about, and I'm at a loss for which was it, 2018, Jim?
It all started with you waking up, as I recall, in 2018 to an internationally breaking news headline, and me also getting a call about the same time. We should probably advance a couple slides forward, Ben.
Sorry about that. So yes, as Jim stated, I woke up to a text message saying, you know, look at this news report. And there was a report that said, you know, that the Clotilda had been found, and it revealed the location. And while it was doubtful to those of us who had studied the Clotilda, this was actually the Clotilda based on the size and the form of the vessel, the location of a vessel had been revealed publicly, and it had been identified as something very significant that, you know, that could be vandalized for a number of reasons, you know, because somebody doesn't want the story told, but also, you know, just because people want a piece of the Holy Grail, they want to own something. So, you know, I woke up with a panic that I had to, you know, mount a response to this, with having not been budgeted. You know, it's not part of our plan. It's not part of our budget. So I reached out immediately to the Southeastern Archaeological Center of the National Park Service for help, and then was referred to the Submerged Resources Center and of the National Park Service. And that, you know, was literally driving into town on my Bluetooth, trying to put together a response with volunteers. The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources came forward and helped us, you know, with vessels, with boats, to get out to the site and look at this. And then, as Jim mentioned, in the interim, somebody had also reached out to search. and told them about it. So Search contacted us and offered their help. And Slave Wrecks Project came on board as well. So we mounted an investigation, and we came and we looked at this vessel, which turned out not to be Clotilda, the 12 Mile Island. We named it the 12 Mile Island wreck. I think we believe it's the schooner Elts, don't we, Jim? But in the meantime, while we're responding and we're on the water, we realized that we're seeing other vessels, or we're seeing remnants of other vessels above the waterline. And we realized that we're in a ship's graveyard, which again, as I mentioned before, my agency is the steward of all of these resources. And we began to realize that we needed to do a survey and record all of these shipwrecks and learn more about this ship's graveyard. And also in the background map work, which as archaeologists, you all know that we do, Jim's team came to realize that this was historically considered, although now it's considered part of the Mobile River, historically it was considered part of Bayou Connaught, which made it the only part of Bayou Connaught we had not searched to look for Clotilda. And then we mounted a remote sensing survey in July of 2018. And the Clotilda was one of a number of vessels that were identified. We systematically put divers on all of those vessels. And, just as all good science, we eliminated all other possibilities until we were left with one.
I should probably add with that when the call came, I was rung up because I was also a National Park Service veteran. I'd been the Director of Maritime Heritage for the Park Service and then for National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Knew those folks, but also, was not unfamiliar with Mobile and the shipwrecks there. We offered all of our help as a company just as help. This wasn't a job for us. This was something that needed to be done. And as archaeologists, we were happy, to work with our colleagues in the Park Service, with the state, and with our friends, Slave Wrecks Project, with whom we'd worked on other projects, including the wreck of the Guerrero, the slave ship in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Getting out there meant doing some homework beforehand. Those early charts and maps helped a great deal. Aerial photos did too, particularly when one that we saw available online and didn't even require a paywall. There it was. All you had to do was type in the right words. Showed an aerial image of this shipwreck, which proved to be about 100. We scaled it out. It was 185 feet long as compared to the 86 feet for Clotilda. Again, a reminder that all archaeology needs to really begin with as much as you can find in archives. So we knew in advance, of course, that it was not that, but it needed to be looked at for the reason Stacy said, but also, and I just need to say this bluntly, so many times this type of history has been denied and people have been told to move along and there's nothing here. The last thing that was needed, that all of us archaeologists felt, and we knew the AHC also felt, was that a group of archaeologists, particularly archaeologists that look like me, should be coming out and saying there's nothing here. So the commitment was that we would go out, we would systematically look. We already had identified a number of other vessels that seemingly were in the area. And at the time, I think I turned you on the boat, Stacy, and I said, I'll bet you one of these shipwreck symbols is Clotilda.
You did.
It turned out to be, but that only came about through a really detailed, systematic approach. Back over to you, Stacy.
Well, I guess we're ready for the next slide, because it was that systematic approach that eventually identified Target 5 as Clotilda. And as you see on the slide, we had the dimensions of Clotilda from the registration paper, so the dimensions were correct. The hull shape was correct. The form of the vessel is a centerboard schooner. The types of wood that we knew that the vessel was made out of were the same types of wood. It had oak frames with southern pine planking, and we were also the thing that convinced me, poor Jim, bless his heart, he had to try hard to convince me, because I was the doubting Thomas on this. And I think what convinced me was the trip to National Archives, because I was saying, yes, we have all this, it's right, it's even in the right location, but is this the Honda Civic of centerboard schooners, or is this the DeLorean? I mean, do we have something unique? And what we learned is that we had something unique. It's a unique size. Most of the schooners that were registered in Mobile Harbor were much smaller. There were a few that were much bigger. There just really weren't many in this mid-size range. But the kicker, and Jim is probably better able to explain it, is that the depth of hold was unique, which made this vessel uniquely fitted for this criminal voyage.
The initial sonar measurements were at about 78 feet by 21 feet. As more mud moved off, what we ultimately got to, and you'll see an image in just a second, we got to a length of 86 feet and a beam of 26 feet. And as we probed inside the hold itself, we got down to within about a foot of where we should be. Depth of hold in a ship is, if my hands are the bow of that ship, everything down from my open hand to where my hands meet, that makes the hold, or the depth of hold. Most Gulf schooners were built like this. Clotilda was built like this. That meant bigger hold in order to store more things, from lumber, as she was said to have been built to carry, to people. And to that end, we're pretty sure, based on the archival record, that this was not the first, but it definitely was the last, but it wasn't the first voyage that Clotilda had likely been engaged with. Going through the National Archives meant not only examining the records of over 1,300 schooners built and registered in the Gulf of Mexico with detailed measurements and documents, but also looking at the insurance papers for Clotilda, which specified built this way, fastened in this way, because it was insured. That in by itself somewhat unusual. But also what we were able to find were the court papers from the various charges that were levied, and the case that ended with Foster getting a $1,000 fine, but also all of the records that survived of every one of Clotilda's voyages. And with that, as we began to reconstruct on paper the career of Clotilda, what emerged was trade to a number of ports, all of which, shall we say with a wink, were involved in that trade. And on one occasion, a voyage out of an area in Louisiana back to New Orleans with a cargo, but a cargo that is listed as nothing but a blank space, and yet a cargo that was consigned to individuals in New Orleans who were intimately involved in the illegal trade, and a few months later would send a vessel directly to Africa to pick up captives. And we know about that because that ship was intercepted by a US Navy vessel. The captives and the ship were landed in the United States. The survivors of the voyage were ultimately repatriated back to Liberia, not home, but Liberia. And the captain and the crew walked away with the jury finding them not guilty. So back to all of what we were doing in the mud. As Stacy says, we had to systematically work through both the archival record and the forensic archaeological record, comparing and contrasting, but always challenging every assumption. As all archaeologists know, our job was not to prove something was Clotilda. Throughout the entire process, we were trying to prove this was not Clotilda. And ultimately, we came down to the conclusion that it was Clotilda. And as you'll see, subsequently, the evidence only continued to grow very powerfully. But with that, a forensic analysis of everything down to near pure iron that had been smithed by hand, an exceptional quality to the shipbuilding, which one would expect because Captain Foster was a shipbuilder. One of these planks here has a line of holes in it, which indicates that unlike most of these Gulf schooners working coastally, at that time, Clotilda had been sheathed with copper, which was only done for the final voyage. But we also found definitive evidence of burning because Captain Foster set his ship on fire and burned it. He said to the waterline, but he was lying, as he did about most things. He burned off the decks forward. The back end of the ship did not burn because he knocked the fittings off of his toilet back there and flooded the ship, and it sank. Up until a few decades back, likely when collapse finally did happen in the mud, Captain Foster's cabin was essentially intact. What was burned was the area where people had been held, because he was trying not to destroy the ship, but destroy the most obvious evidence of the crime at the time. This is our sonar image as we began. Again, now with this, we were getting to that 86-foot length and beam, but let's go to the next slide, where now over time, as we worked with the AHC and did not only initial documentation without excavation, but ultimately taking samples and some very limited, moving mud here and there, but no major excavation. We also found that as we were doing this, what was also happening is the changes in the river sediment levels occurred. Some of this came from the extreme weather events over the last few years, but what you see is Clotilda emerging from a shroud of mud and fallen trees and some of its own timbers. Powerfully and evocatively, what began to emerge was not only the traces or outlines of structure in its main hold, which in the middle slide would be the area just above the word march, but also other structure behind it that began to outline not only the area where Foster's cabin had been, but also an area in the hold that we suspected was likely where they had segregated or kept the food and the water, all part of a strategy used both in this trade, but also in prisons and elsewhere to control people by controlling access to the necessities of life. So again, if you brutally treat people, if you strip them naked, if you put them alone, so not alone, but if you put them with everyone else in a hold, women, children, males, everybody packed in a tight space, and keep them in the dark and don't feed them or don't give them enough water, you don't necessarily need to do much more, particularly to keep people under control, as they found, with the exception being those who resorted to exceptional acts of violence, both sexual violence and beatings and at times murder, in order to enforce their position. These difficult points that have been talked about in historical accounts and seen by some also do show up forensically. And in that, what we see here with Clotilda and what began to emerge was a sense of the tightness and the area in which 110 people had been packed, and at which at least 2 and possibly a third person died on during the voyage, according to the accounts of the few survivors who did talk about the voyage. So let's go to the next slide. With that, we made our report to the Alabama Historical Commission, and with that, the AHC, with an understanding now, not only of the ship's identity, but as always, I mean, the significance had been known from the start. The Alabama Historical Commission now faced the discovery of a highly significant ship, very close to an area, and a ship as well that, and again, we'll get to this in a bit, whose location was known, at least to some, and was about to be known to others. And so with that came the next step, which was how best to respond to this and how to manage this, because clearly something needed to happen. Stacy?
Well, I will have to give the Alabama governor and legislature credit, and of course my director and assistant director, Lisa Jones and Clara Nobles, who went to the legislature and the governor and, stressed how important this was and our responsibilities as stewards of this very significant archaeological site. And the state put forward $1 million to do the next phases of investigation, which is the first time, certainly in my 20-year career, that the state of Alabama has put that significant amount of money towards a single archaeological project in the state. So where we are now is we're sort of in a mid stage where we went out and did field work. Well, the pictures that you see on the slide are actually preliminary to that, but we've been doing work to really gather all the scientific evidence possible so we can make the best decisions, you know, the most well-informed decisions on how to best preserve the vessel. So what you see in the photographs on the slide are the first two are putting water flow monitors in the water so that we can learn how water moves around the vessel, how the water levels fluctuate over time, how this, you know, we're looking at everything from that to, I don't think these are ones that take salinity, but, you know, the salinity of water. There's so many things that are, that influence the preservation of the vessel. On the far right, they're taking core samples. So we've taken, we've done both hand cores, and then that one is a core drilling rig to look at the sediment that the shipwreck that sits in and the foundation underneath that sediment. So we'll know how secure it is eventually in that location. I guess then in May, next slide, we went out with the whole team from Resolve and Search on a barge and stayed and spent 2 weeks gathering evidence. Some of that, very little of that was diving and excavation. Most of that was, again, collecting samples and information to tell us the general status of the vessel. And all of the information that we've taken has been sent to various labs around the country for specialized analysis. And those are slowly coming in, and a report is being compiled, and that report will lead to a management plan. We will use this information in conjunction with the state and the community of Africatown to decide where we're going forward.
At all steps, what we've really been doing, I think, as you see, is I keep using the word forensics, and that's not just because I'm a fan of the CSI television franchise, but because that's how archaeology really needs to happen. And particularly with sites as important and as sensitive as this. Many times we've described this work as doing archaeological biopsy, and that's exactly what it has been. Next slide, please. With the team out there, we deployed hard hat divers so that we had constant communications. The water is at times fast moving. It's very turbid. Up until the most recent project, we had seen no more than an inch or two of invisibility. Funny how it happens, but we had the best visibility of all time when we went out in May. We had over a foot. So we were seeing the wreck as opposed to touching and feeling and intuiting the wreck for the first time. Whether we had archaeologists as well as Resolve's technical divers on the site, everything was monitored and taped. Aaron Joseph, who was the Resolve project manager, you see there in his orange helmet, with his team, coordinated the dives. I was there, Stacy was there. We were all there communicating with them as they did their work. And then we would also deploy archaeology divers. Next slide, please. The first thing to do was get rid of a lot of trees. There were 14 of these that in some cases, one weighed 70 tons. And they certainly proved to be a challenge, not just to the divers, but also challenged the structural integrity of the wreck. Next slide.
Jim, did you want to point out the sonar image and that's how they were removed? Or
yes, actually, we'll go back. The sonar, actually, we were positioned over, and with the sonar and exact positioning, every box you see there is a tree that had to be plucked and pulled. We'd also done the same thing for large portions of the wreck, disarticulated timbers that we'd spotted too. Next slide. With that, we began recovery. We had a large bay forward where we would put timbers in because we needed to keep things wet. They could come out of the water and be assessed, photographed, drawn, scanned, but then put back in. Working again with our, the team, which included, again, partners from DWP and the SlaveRex project. Here you see Jay Hagler and Kamau Siddiqui. Kamau has been on the project ever since the start. Jay joined for this part. Diving as archaeologists, working, recovering, the team of archaeologists, as well as the conservators from Terramar Conservators and scientists who came, all moved and danced around in careful harmony with a large crane picking up, in times, multi-ton baskets to set them down. Let's keep going. Then everything carefully documented and assessed. Kyle Lent is drawing one of the artifacts as Lisa Jones, this Alabama State Historic Preservation Officer and Director of the AHC, supervises him. Next slide. Bria Brooks from University of West Florida, and also a member of the search team, was there documenting. We were also joined by our archaeological co-principal investigators, Dr. Ayana Omelade Fluellen, and Dr. Justin Donovan, with the Society of Black Archaeologists and with Diving with a Purpose and SlaveRex Project. We did all of this under permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers because Clotilda is listed in the National Register of Historic Places at a national level of significance. And this required compliance not only with the National Historic Preservation Act, but all the other laws, as this is also a marine estuarine reserve. So for a number of reasons, just given all of the sensitivities and the significance, everything proceeded procedurally and carefully. Next slide.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that we brought the some of the pictures you were seeing, we brought the timbers up. They were briefly inspected before being submerged, but you know, once the recording and the field specimen numbers were done, the TIVAC tags were put on each timber that we decided that and they were placed back in the bosun's locker on the vessel and covered with sandbags, because they're better preserved in that anaerobic atmosphere than you know, they are out of the water.
We picked up a lot of pieces of deck timber. We picked up hull planks. We picked up a variety of larger timbers that had been scattered around and lay in and on the wreck. The one area that remained very full of sediment and that we have not archaeologically probed is the area where the crew stayed. That seemed a perfect place to put everything back on top of that mud-sealed area, and also to keep clear and to not fill the area that is somewhat exposed. That was the hold itself. Conservators Claudia Camello and Paul Mardikian, with whom we've worked on a variety of projects, and Paul's work includes conserving artifacts from Titanic for France, as well as the conservation of the Confederate submarine HL Hunley, and a number of many other projects. They carefully analyzed and assessed everything to come up with a better understanding, along with biologists and structural engineers and naval architects, as to how Clotilda was doing. After all, being colonized with bacteria, marine organisms of different types, you know that sites are transitioning when you lift them up out of the water, and all sorts of little crabs and other worms start climbing out from the timbers. For that reason as well, too, at all stages, this has been carefully planned to do as little harm as possible to the site as well as its surroundings. Next slide.
Well, and one of the things Paul was trying to do in some of those pictures was determine the shear strength of the wood, or how strong the wood was, and how well preserved.
Yeah. What you see there in the top corner is one of the diagnostic artifacts, and that is the hawse pipe through which the anchor cable would pass to moor Clotilda. At every stage, we were also going back. I mean, yes, we'd identified it as Clotilda, but we constantly looked at everything to retest and retest and retest this. The anchor cable, which would have been rope, is consistent with the time. The diameter of the hawse pipe is consistent with what would be needed for a vessel of this type at that tonnage. But consistently and constantly, like I said, we would do that. And to tell a story that had us all going for a second was when we were working, we suddenly discovered electrical wiring and 3 switches in a row inside the hold, up at a level just below where the hull had burned down to, and screwed into, as it turned out, not intact planking, but an area where the planking had burned away, and these had been directly screwed into the exposed frames or ribs. It did take a second, though, to go, electrical wiring on an 1860 burned ship, but we ultimately sorted through it all. The patent, the style, dates to the 1920s. These would probably been installed no later than the early 1930s, or maybe even as late as World War II, when the area was actively being used as a staging area for scrapping vessels left over from World War II, one of which still rests 100 feet off of Clotilda. But again, at all stages, that happened. We looked at it and said to everybody, okay, here we go. Let's take a look at this. because that's responsible, honest archaeology. Something like this comes up, you talk about it, everybody looks at it. We then sorted through it all and determined, no, the vessel had been lit. The wires ran directly to shore, by the way. And it's another reminder that this vessel was never lost. And that's why we'll never say that it was discovered. We didn't discover it. There were people who knew exactly where it was. And we recently were shown correspondence where individuals a few decades ago were actively diving in it, discussed entering Captain Foster's cabin, reported that some of the copper sheathing could not be seen because it was too cold to feel under the hull, but talked a bit about the scorching and other things. And this wreck was charted. Never lost. And so our job really has been focused on the most important aspect, which is forensically identifying this and also dealing with it, not only as a sensitive archaeological site, but as the scene of a crime. Next slide, please.
Jim, did you want to mention the steering mechanism? And I'm sorry, my
No,
utility is just telling you what to say.
No. I mean, Stacy has been a co-PI at every step of the work as a state archaeologist. And with that, we all would meet each day, talk and coordinate with the entire team. Doctors Flewellen, Dunham, Stacy, Aaron, we all got together. Dr. Michael Brennan from Search was our archaeological forensic. He was the forensic archaeology PI and also dealing with the natural resources interface. Mike's PhD is in archaeological oceanography from the University of Rhode Island. So with all of that, as we kept going through this and we were doing our science, there were those moments where something had come up and you'd go, wow, what's that? And then my job, which basically, despite any fancy title, was resident ship nerd, was to say, you know, that looks like and it would turn out to be. And one of the things we found was a huge iron pulley that had been mounted inside what was known as a gun tackle steering mechanism. Ergo, this was the actual pulley through which the rope had passed where Captain Foster turned that wheel and that rudder turned, steered Clotilda in to and out of its illegal voyage. We found a number of things like that spoke powerfully, including smaller things, because as we did our next stage, which was excavating 2 small meter units out of about what, we could have probably put 200 in there, but in the main hold itself.
Not under our permit.
No, definitely not under our permit, but if we were to have excavated the entire hold, we would have had to put a few hundred in. But again, this is a biopsy. So 2 1 meter square by meter deep units to expose one portion of planking along the hull and down to an area where we could do some more sampling, including sampling of mud and cores for DNA. One of the things that we have been looking at is environmental DNA. And with that, we can now say with absolute authority that yes, occasionally gators have been in there. Yes, yes. The water moccasins that we saw swimming by us from time to time, they've been in there too. There's bacteria, there's all sorts of things. In short, this process was focused on every aspect. This had to be a definitive look within the framework of the plan to give the state and the community as much hard science as could be found and learned to talk about what's happening with Clotilda as a site and as a shipwreck to inform next steps in what could happen.
Right. And the photograph here is Dr. Donovan screening the sediment from those excavations Jim was.
Yes. I've got another awesome one of Dr. Flewellen doing it as well. And then there's photos that we'll never show, like this old man climbing out of the water after diving on Clotilda. Anyway, yeah. So here's the barge on the site that gives you a sense of the conditions, and you can also see how muddy the river can be. And at the back there I am again with Stacy and Lisa Jones, the executive director of the Alabama Historical Commission and the State Historic Preservation Officer. Missing from that photo, we've got others, lots of them, are the entire team.
And that's Daniel Fiore, who's responsible for those beautiful photographs in the film. work.
Yes. So clearly that's a drone capture of the four of us. So next slide, please. We're working on our report.
Yeah, we're working. The report will come together. As I said earlier, it will help us determine how to move forward. We recovered 4 artifacts that are being conserved for eventual display in Heritage House. We're talking years down the road, as you all know, the challenges of conservation and how that takes time. In the meantime, some of those samples that we took will be on display still submerged in water. And the Heritage House was supposed to already be open. It has been delayed like everything else due to shipping issues. I think COVID initially, and then shipping of building materials. And I'm not sure, Darren may have a better idea than me when exactly that they're planning on opening now, but hopefully soon. They're working on the exhibits. The building is finished, and they're now working on the exhibits themselves.
So as we work on the report, as results come in, and they're starting to come in, we've been writing, and this will be the largest, thickest, and most documented report on Clotilda yet. At every step of this, we worked closely with folks, not just in the state and with the Army Corps, but also keeping Darren involved. Darren and I often each day would be doing this back and forth, but we also met with the community and closed the project with a community meeting. At that meeting, we shared what we had found and what we had seen, and at that stage too, also shared, as I'm sure many people are aware of, the fact that the hold is not empty. It's not only packed with sediment, but we have found structural remains that we believe are the surviving members of the platforms upon which Darren's ancestors and others' ancestors were actually held, and where they were basically stacked with a space equal to, we did the numbers, and the British government, bless them, and their bureaucracy had come up with the proper formula by which one could transport people illegally. And it turned out to be a 6-foot long space with 1 foot 6 inches for a male, 5 feet by 1 foot 4 inches for a female, and 4 feet 1 foot for a child. And if you take that cruel, callous math and apply it to the spacing of the posts that we've seen, you could fit inhumanly 110 people into that space. That level of archaeological survival needs to be further confirmed. As I said, we only biopsied, but it is a reminder of just how unique and how sensitive this site is. And to that end, as we continue to work on the report, we are consistently not just triple checking, but consistently going back again and again, probing, questioning, and also continuing to absorb the new data that comes in.
Well, thank you for that. That was very informative. I learned a lot. So much has happened since earlier this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to just kind of take a moment. We're in an age within archaeology and underwater archaeology where community archaeology is becoming more important. And one of the things that I heavily focus on is sustainable archaeology beyond that. And that's looking at one that takes into account the environment, the community, offering opportunities for community members all together as you're actually doing the archaeology itself. And one of the things that seems to be coming across is that work is being done with this project. And so what I would like to do is just kind of stop for 1 second and kind of go to Darren and just talk about the descendant reaction, the descendants' feelings, kind of where the descendant community is seeing everything that's happening, and where are you going with it?
I appreciate that. And I appreciate sitting here listening to Dr. Delgado, Stacy. And I'm sure they can appreciate what I'm about to say because of their passion as archaeologists. I've been tripping over archaeologists and divers every time I open my door for the last 3 years. And I'm just trying to wonder if I should be diplomatic. I think I'll just be me. I could give a rat's ass about all this equipment and divers and all this stuff, because what new Clotilda Descendants President Jeremy Ellis and I share is Coople's blood running through our veins. What Treasurer Bill Green shares is Osiah Keeby's blood running through his veins. And this is where, for me, it always gets tough. I'm gonna try to hold it together. When I go down to the river and I look at the path Clotilda took coming up the river, I think about when the ship slowed down and they finally looked around at each other and knew they didn't know where they were, but they knew they were where they were. And they looked at each other, 14, 15, 16 years old, 18 years old. Youngest was 2. And they figured out, we don't know where we are, but we're all we got. We're all we got. We don't know where we are, but we're all we got. And don't get me wrong, you know, I respect everybody's, I've met so many people who just have this archaeological passion, and I watch them. I've learned so much about archaeology from Jim. I've learned so much about the River Delta from Ben Raines, whose efforts began all this stuff to find Clotilda. I've learned so much from Dr. Justin Donovan. I've learned so much from all the people who have descended on Mobile, Alabama, because of the find of that ship. And it never ceases to amaze me. Every time I'm on a panel with Jim or a panel with Ben Raines, people really are interested in the find of the ship. It's almost like, you know, as a sports writer, I've learned over the years what people like to see. People go to car races to see a wreck. They want to see cars wreck. That's what they're interested in. I am interested in the stories of the people in that cargo hold. And that is going to be what the Clotilda Descendants Association is going to focus on for the rest of our days, to make sure that the people in that cargo hold stories live forever. We have a play, Ocean in My Bones, that's directed by Terrence Spivey that we put on last year, 1-act play. It's going to be put on again this year at the Spirit of Our Ancestors Festival, which past Vice President Joycelyn Davis has sunk her heart and soul into. And then we're going to have the full stage play in February 2024. From there, we hope to take this thing all the way to any colleges that want to see it, and eventually to Broadway. I was just in Times Square a few weeks ago, and I was looking up at the marquee, and I'm like, one day, the world will see our story. And it's going to happen quicker than later, because the film Descendant will be out next week on Netflix. And it documents the atrocities that the city of Mobile and all types of regimes going forward for the last 50, 60 years have tried to do to make sure that the community of Africatown does not exist. It's going to put a broad spotlight on everything that's wrong with America. And it's going to be a microcosm of what America is trying to do. Airbrush history, wipe this out. Don't listen to critical race theory, because it's going to make the little white kids hate themselves. No, it's going to make them hate you for what America has done. And every time I see all of this stuff going on, I think about Coopoli. I think about Osiah, I think about Cudjoe, I think about Bobby Dennison. I think about all these souls. And I was thinking today, when I was looking at the slides that Jim had up there, I was thinking, wow, they'd be looking now, where all of this is for us? It's $1 million of equipment is for us. these barges, these divers, all of this is for us. Wow, we must be something. Yes, you are. You are something. You are something. You are something. And we are something because we are your descendants. And we're going to make sure that your stories never die because you were the most important people on that ship. And you will forever, your stories will forever be known. The descendants community is committed. The Clotilda Descendants Association is committed to making sure that everybody who will listen will know the people in those cargo hold, in that cargo hold story, because the stories of them, Jim was talking about how they were packed in there and the brainwashing techniques, no clothes, chained together, eating where you had to crap, sleeping where you had to crap, all these techniques to break them. And they never broke. Mm-hmm. They never broke. They never broke. No matter what you try to do to them, they never broke. And this is what America needs to understand about our race of people. We are forgiving people. We are resilient people. I am so sad that America does not understand what we need to do here to live together. I say this all the time. You cannot act like the Native Americans' lands weren't taken. You cannot act like 12 million Africans' lives were changed in the transatlantic slave trade, and another 2 million lie at the bottom of the ocean as shark bait. Come on, man. What is that? Come on, America. What is that? We have got to make sure that we understand what it takes, what it's going to take to live together as a people. I love my passion of sports writing over the years that I've done, because I've learned teamwork. I don't care what color you are next to me, as long as we're on the same team. And as long as we wear the same jersey, we're on the same team. The game is played for you to win. And the team is structured to win the game. If we got the same jersey on, we're on the same team. It just so happens that our jersey is red, white, and blue. Give a damn what I look like. Give a damn what Jim looks like. We are all in this together. And if we don't get it through our heads soon and start understanding that we got to live together and that it's going to take white people to tell other white people what you're doing is wrong. Only white people can fix white people. We can't do it. Hey, listen to us, you know. But it can be fixed if you see somebody with classified documents laying around your house. Hey, man, what's that? Why you got these laying around your house? What are they, party favors? That's wrong. It's not right. Don't do it. What's going to happen that kills America is not going to be people who want to do America harm or fan the flames of divisiveness. It's going to be the people who sit back and watch people like that do something like that and don't say nothing about it. It's okay. Don't say nothing about it. It's okay. It's not okay. So I contend that the resilience of those people in the cargo hold are what's most important. I love these people that I have met. You, Dr. Jones, you, Dr. Delgado, Stacy. I love watching Kamal Siddiqui, one of my favorite human beings. Jay Hagler, one of my favorite human beings, divers, who, by the way, are going to teach me to dive so I can go into the cargo hold of Clotilda as soon as I can find somebody to watch alligators. Yeah, I know, Jim. But I love it. And I just want people to understand that I am not poo-pooing the science of all this. I'm just saying the humanitarian aspect of all this is what I care about.
And thank you for that, because I think that's important, is that as we discuss this, one of the things that we have to bring back and bring home is that this is the story of people, not just an event, not just a crime. It's not that far removed. And one of the people brought it up in the chat, and I think it's very important to talk about those who were, so the 110 who were enslaved on this ship started Africatown. And Africatown still persists with their descendants still living in, working in, and operating in Africatown. So it's not something that's obsolete. It's not something that doesn't exist. This is a story that is very much connected to people today and still exists. So this is why it's so important. And the descendant community is so passionate about this, because these are their direct ancestors that the story and this movement of vindication is finally coming to light. Stacy.
Let's see if I know how to remove this now. Apparently not. One of the things I just wanted to say is that that was one of the things that initially drew me to archaeology, is the fact that it is storytelling. But you know, the history books are very, or, you know, this is a cliche, the history is written by the victors, but, you know, not everybody gets to write their story in the history book. We all write our history in the soil, or the sediment in this case. And archaeology is, you know, gives me the opportunity and the privilege to help to bring these stories to light, stories of everyday people and their lives, and, you know, alternate views of situations that have been painted one way by propaganda, but we're able to look, you know, through archaeology to tell the truth. I had one mentor who used to say truth comes from the blade of a shovel, but I think that in a lot of ways it does. And to me, that's one of the real, it's the drive for me behind being an archaeologist, is to be able to learn these stories and to help other people learn the stories.
I couldn't agree further. And I've been privileged in my career to have worked on shipwrecks, both iconic as well as ships that aren't really known to other people. Ultimately, what has always been compelling for me has been that connection back to people, because it's in moments like shipwrecks or events like this where the true nature of people is seemingly rendered. You certainly saw that on an early morning on the Titanic's decks, but you've seen it in other cases too. And having swum over the Arizona's decks where there's a tangle of fire hose where a bunch of guys stood until the fireball literally disintegrated them to try to put the fires out. You know, I remember looking at that and thinking about that, just as I was once hovering over the spot where where Isidore Straus refused to get in the lifeboat, and his wife got out and went with him because they loved each other and would die together. Clotilda's hold, where those people were not broken and resisted and persisted and created the community, and with the descendants of today reflecting that. So many ways and so many circumstances. What archaeology can do, perhaps, is more than just simply add to the story. I think it can provide, coming back to the reason why we do the archaeology the way we do, which is a model by which increasingly archaeology is about working with many people. Archaeology is about not just a handful coming in, but bringing everybody along and making that a public event. Archaeology is about making sure that you not only have a consultation, but that you have active and ongoing engagement, particularly for the people for whom this means so much. I think too, archaeology in this case has been about rectifying in a small way. Well, rectifying is the wrong word. I'm going to just confronting a lie. Confronting lies that were told about the voyage, and then later lies that became the subject of boasts. The forensic evidence there makes what happened pretty clear. And in that, what the forensic evidence also shows, again, as I said earlier, this ship's location was known exactly. What it was known exactly, and this wreck was photographed and published in 1913. That needs to be addressed. That absolutely needs to be addressed, because what has happened for many years has been a smirking reference. As I said at the start, let's just keep moving. Nothing happened here. That started in 1860 with Godbold and his crew going up that river, going right past that burned out hulk with its stubs of its mast sticking out, and saw nothing. That continued on through many years with other people knowing exactly what was going on. So the light has been shown, and in that, the light that has been shown also needs to reflect the fact that some of the problems we face come from exactly those types of actions that took place through the years and up until recently, saying nothing happened here.
So what I'd like to do is just give, we have quite a few questions in the Q&A, and just giving a little space and grace for kind of this conversation and how heavy it is, and how heavy it should be, and how it should be hitting everybody a little bit different than I think what you expected to walk into, because oftentimes we expect to walk into a talk about, archaeology and just hear about a shipwreck. I think to hear that this is one that very much has a living community associated with it, one that has a community that very much has been fighting for years to basically have the story of their ancestors vindicated and told nationally, and not in a way, but to have it to one where they're actually recognized for the pain and kind of the brutality that they had to deal with in the system that we had here in the US. So in looking at some of the questions, I'm going to just pull away for a little bit more to the archaeological, and then we'll go to those that have more of an emotional kind of tone to them. So I'll start with okay. I'm not sure, Stacy, if you can answer this one, but how far below the surface is the vessel located?
About 30 feet, but I mean, it fluctuates, because a big rain event and the water is very high, and then, in drought or an event that pulls the tide out, it gets very low. We do have surveillance cameras on the vessel, and that's not a surprise because that's been published before. And so we're able to sort of watch it remotely, and, the water level fluctuates a good bit. And of course, we'll have more detailed information in the upcoming report, because that's one of the things we're trying to monitor is the water levels.
Do you plan eventually to raise the wreck?
We don't know. That's one of the things we're trying to determine, is we're trying to gather all the information to make informed, responsible decisions. I mean, if we went in there and tried to pull it up and it came up in thousands of pieces, then we wouldn't be doing our jobs very well. And also, in all maritime archaeology, I mean, you don't pull anything up without a solid conservation plan and funding to see that conservation through. And that takes years and years. I mean, if that were to happen, that would certainly extend beyond my career. So, we have to handle these things very carefully, and so no decision has been made. We're just trying to gather the information to make that decision in conjunction with our other partners in the state and the Africatown community. And the federal government also.
So we have one person said, fascinating. The barge and the activity on the site would have been difficult to hide from the public. How are you protecting the site to ensure it remains undisturbed until the next logical phase of archaeology can be conducted?
Well, as I said before, we have surveillance cameras on the site, and those feed, directly to something that I have with me at all times, and my assistant does as well. So, we're notified. They're motion detector cameras. So, you know, when something happens, I see a lot of birds flying and boats going past and things like that, but we do have cameras on the vessel at all times. The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources with their marine police are very quick to respond. We put buoys and created a no boat zone. Those were pretty promptly washed away by a storm event. So now we're looking at a possible proposal to fix aids to navigation to help preserve the vessel. And as I stated before, we did, you know, after this last phase in May, our divers placed sandbags, which is hopefully will give some modicum of temporary protection till we can decide what we're going to do permanently.
I think we also noted early on, the location is not a secret to a certain number of folks, and people certainly have gone out there and gone by, and its location has been known, of course, for decades. The monitoring has been key, as Stacy says. The other fact is that it truly is also protected by this very big gator that lives just across the river.
That's true.
There are active nests of water moccasins, which are the meanest snakes in and on the water. This is not just hyperbole. They're there. We see them.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
No, it's okay, Darren. I'm going to be in there in that water with you, man. I did it. We can do it together.
Okay, Jim.
All right. So I do have some more like environmental questions. Could a hurricane destroy it?
Probably not, given that it's far up the river. The saline content to the water changes when you have a storm event, and Mobile Bay will get pushed up a bit and some of that salt will move in. The water processes, as we're really beginning to understand them, have everything to do with rain coming down and washing over. And with that, we've had a few really major hurricane events, which did not appear to really modify Clotilda. Mud moves on, mud moves off. And that seems to have happened for a long time. Coming back to what Stacy said as well, just no surprise, it will be in the report. We see varying levels of preservation based on that type of exposure and then reburial. Some of the wood closer to the surface is more heavily colonized with marine organisms and bacteria, whereas down lower, it appears not to be the same. But again, we're biopsying.
I do have a question about the flora and fauna. Since you mentioned there's a lot of critters and bacteria, have you tested for that?
There have been a number of partners that Stacy had indicated from different universities and marine labs. We have been working particularly with the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, University of West Florida, University of North Carolina, and others. There's a wide range of everything from different types of bacteria to other marine, like I said, marine organisms, and we're also catching fish. The environmental DNA aspect is very good because it can tell us exactly what type of fish, what type of reptiles, things of that sort. So that wasn't just being funny. That type of work has happened, and we're getting the final reports from the last few of those folks pretty soon, within the next few weeks. It's taken them time, particularly as we've been analyzing things down to the bacteriological level now that we understand what a role bacteria plays.
Okay. So Darren, I want to throw a question at you. Somebody's asking more just a history question. How do you know that there were 110 people on board?
Well, Captain Foster took very good notes and very copious notes. There has been there's been talk that one lady jumped overboard and that there was 109 or was thrown overboard and she didn't make it. You know, these are the kind of stories that I'm enjoying learning about, because we can get to the truth about some things as we keep talking to ancestors and say, well, you know, I heard this, and what do you know about that? And some people have different stories. For me, I didn't know anything. I'm learning everything I know right now because they didn't tell me a thing, because Clotilda was a secret in the community and it wasn't supposed to even exist. So I know now that they were trying to protect me. They were trying to protect me by not telling me what I needed to know as a young man growing up in that community, which was a beautiful community to grow up in, because it was just something that wasn't supposed to happen. So there's so many different stories, not a bunch different, but there's different variations of some stories. The 109, the 110. I contend that it started out with 110. Did it end up with 110? Possibly, maybe not. I don't know, but it started out as 110. Okay.
So from Captain Foster's, we know that it started with 110. Yeah. We have one other person. Oh, sure.
Foster's notes also indicated that he had at least one person die on the voyage.
Yeah.
I want to call out the research of Dr. Hannah Durkin, who's actually been out to Africatown and as a speaker at the Spirit of Ancestors Festival. Dr. Durkin's work has been looking into accounts that had largely been forgotten or lost, not only, of course, Kosola's accounts, but also Rodoshi and Sally Smith and others, Matilda McCreer, who've offered their own versions, at least as filtered in some cases, by a white reporter in a newspaper account in the 1920s. But in that, some of those stories are there. And then there are stories that have not been written down, but which have been shared by those who know. But just to clear one thing up, by the way, I did see one comment where somebody asked me not to compare Titanic to Clotilda. That was not my intention. And if anybody took offense, that was not what I was driving at. The point is that I've seen powerful things underwater that make me cry. Nothing has ever equated to this. And there's not a day that I don't work on this project where I don't have a tear in my eye when I confront, from my own sheltered and privileged perspective, what exactly that must have been. So I didn't mean to offend you. Titanic is not Clotilda, but it is a sobering and terrible place to visit with all of those dead down there, some of whose traces you can see.
So Darren, you made a comment earlier, and I think it came across. So someone asked a clarifying question. For Mobile Training School, what was the type of education that young women received? Because when you gave your example, you talked about the gentleman and how he talked to the young men, but you never actually mentioned that women were attending the school. So a person asked specifically, what type of education were women receiving?
Well, I apologize if I alluded to the fact that only men went there. I didn't mean that. I think I did say young men and young women, but we have an instructor from Mobile County Training School who's still alive right here in the community, Valina McCants, Mrs. McCants. I'm terrified every time I see her and she's in her 90s. These people taught us things that we needed to move forward. So I guarantee you that whatever we were taught as men, instructors like Valina McCants taught the women, the little girls. I can't tell you enough about Mobile County Training School. It just was unreal. I mean, it wasn't a boarding school or anything like that. It was just the love in the halls on the campus, from my classmates to the teachers, to the physical education teachers, to everybody. Everybody was on board and vested in us going forward and being the best people we could be. I contend if we could rekindle that, man, you know what this country could be? If we could rekindle actual education the way it was when there was so much love for the students, not just what you could teach them, but love for us to learn, love for us to go out and be who we are, love for one another. I don't remember but one fight at Mobile County Training School. One fight in the years that I went there. Now, Bill may say something different. I don't know. Bill Green. But I don't remember but one fight, one disagreement. It was a remarkable community, and the churches and that school as the anchor was what brought it all together.
Thank you for that. I do have, and I'm kind of bringing it bringing it from history on through as we see some of the questions popping up. So did the community at any point before 2018 petition to have the state actually look for the wreck, or did the community in any way push for the state to do active research on finding the wreck?
This is a question where we need Joe Womack here. The community, yeah. You laugh because you know Joe Womack. Joe Womack is our environmental and community, for lack of a better word, watchdog. He is the president of CHESS, which is clean, healthy, I think established, sustainable. I don't know all of the acronym, but it's Joe Womack's organization. And Joe is the person who made sure there would be no more heavy industry come. He is the person who has spent a good part of his life making sure that the wrongs in that community were not repeated. And I'm sure that if he was here, and I could find this out for you and put it in chat really quickly, I'm sure that Joe was very active in trying to find out as much about that community as possible. And remember, I was gone for 20 years. I was in Detroit for 20 years when a lot of things were going on here in Mobile back in the 90s and that type thing. So that would be a question for someone maybe like Bill or Jeremy, who's on here, who could answer that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we have a few questions about communities. They're saying, someone said that something sensitive like this, there might be communities who are not interested in having these stories told or put forward. The question is, have the community of descendant groups of the enslaving families, so Captain Foster or the Meyer family, have made any comments or said anything? Do they have mixed feelings, want to set things right, or want to stop preserving the wreck? Or is it more of a general ambivalence and ignorance? I know the issue is very complicated and a touchy one.
Mm-hmm. I'm encouraged by a lot of things that are happening now, including some of the descendants of the enslavers reaching out to talk. I don't really want to talk about specifics of who they are right now because it's pretty delicate going forward. I'm trying to respect a lot of things about what they are trying to accomplish by reaching out. So I don't want to just say, okay, I'm talking to these people, I'm talking to this person, talking to these people. But I'm encouraged that they are reaching out. And that means a lot to me, and it should mean a lot to places like Mobile, okay, who over the years have made concerted efforts to keep this story very quiet. State of Alabama, it should say things to them that now we are turning the corner into a new arena here. And we need to start sitting down and talking about things. You know, when Mandela got out of prison in South Africa, he started I believe it was a commission to study things about apartheid that was wrong. And that commission in another form still exists today. I contend that we need to stop BSing as a state, as a city, and start sitting down and talking about the real things we can do to fix this thing. Real things we can do. There's some dialogue that's been started, but we still got a long way to go. I'm happy to be able to talk to students from the Blackburn Institute very soon at the University of Alabama. Their mission is to fix things that are wrong with Alabama. Well, I'm telling you, that's a hell of a job, okay? That they're going to undertake. But we're going to sit there and talk to them about it, and so many others. So what I'm saying is, I am so encouraged by things that are happening that wasn't happening last year, that wasn't happening 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move it for 1 second over to the archaeology side. So we have questions about preservation, what's being done on the preservation side with the materials that have been recovered.
Everything current only 4 artifacts were recovered in this most recent phase. They were all in passive conservation. Well, actually a little more advanced in passive conservation. Initial conservation treatment began by Terramar. Everything is being held in museum storage facility, and the work has also included initial assessment, including X-ray of some of those materials. So conservation will be proceeding. It's just, again, to remind everybody who doesn't, marine conservation takes a very long time. And the more complex artifacts, like the steering mechanism piece, the iron has to be separated from the wood because the treatment for one hurts the other. So that type of dismantling has to happen. But for now, everything is actually going through its desalinization process, because while it is brackish, there's still salt, and all of that needs to be coming out.
Okay, and the 4 artifacts, what again? Did you ever state?
There's a representative section of planking that seems to come, that it comes from above the water line. Mm-hmm. There is that section of steering apparatus, which is the large deck beam with an inset cut in which the pulley for the steering mechanism is there with some of the rope. There is the hawse pipe, which is basically lead, and then there's another section of plank.
Okay, and then the question that no one ever likes to answer on the archaeology side: when will this report be ready?
The draft report has been coming together, as you can imagine, with a few dozen authors, including different labs. We anticipate being able to present the draft to the state within the next month. That will then have to go through review by them, as well as additional peer review.
Corps of Engineers, the permitting agency.
Yes. So it's going to take a little time. This is the most comprehensive report that's been done. But ultimately, that report will be out and subject to redaction of things like, yes, well, people know the map that says where it is. It would be available.
And the community will have a chance to look at it before it's released to the public too.
Yes.
So that brings me into another question: is how has the archaeology and archival research that's been done around this changed the evolving history of Alabama and African Americans in the country? Have you basically found new information that you don't think had been brought to light, or that had a light shined on it before as a result of the current research?
I wouldn't say we found it. I mean, it's always been there, but I think that it's like that shining the light on it was a good term. I think it's a story that, the first time I ever walked into the Africatown community in 2010, working with the cemeteries and, meeting Miss Lorna Woods and a lot of the folks in the community, I just couldn't believe, I grew up in Alabama. I had Alabama history. We didn't learn about this. And, I just was like, this is amazing. I mean, this is, I had my daughters were children at the time, and I had them with me, and I was like, this is the type of story that I want them to know. These are the type of people I want them to look up to, because this is such a story of triumph over adversity. And I couldn't believe that, it wasn't widely known, that I didn't learn about it in school, that they didn't learn about it in school. So I think that hopefully that's what this has served, is to shine the light, to bring this story to the public. And I believe, and Darren can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is now being the story is now being included in Alabama history curriculum, which is right. Wonderful. And then of course, having the Heritage House Museum to tell the story in the community, which I think is very important. Right. That because this story belongs to the community of Africatown before it belongs to the world, but it belongs to them first, and it's their story to tell. So right.
Anyway, and as an aside to that, these are the things I'm talking about. Things are changing, and the people who are holding on by their fingernails to make sure that we stay the way we used to, they're losing the grip. So you might as well get on board with the fact that we are now trying to figure this thing out. I speak to kids all the time, and I tell these kids, seek the truth. Seek the truth. Don't accept anything other than the truth, because you are the ones that's going to fix this mess. It's going to be y'all. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. but it's going to happen maybe in my granddaughter's lifetime, that we can see a better, uh, uh, a better way of living. I have a video that I post on my Facebook page every so often, every 3 months or so. It's a little black kid and a little white kid, 3 or 4 years old, walking down the street holding hands, having fun, because they don't hate unless they're taught to hate. They don't hate unless they're taught to hate. We got to figure all this out. I contend that the Clotilda descendants' voices should be at the forefront of anything that we need to talk about in this country that talks about equality. You know, we owe that to the people in the cargo hold of that ship. I do, and I'm gonna keep talking because we owe it to them.
So based on that,
If I answer that question, I'm sorry.
No. I got a few questions for you now.
Okay.
You even opened up the box.
All right.
So I have some questions. DNA. Has any DNA been done with the people in Africatown to put it in a database? Because we have some people who are interested in if they are potentially descendants of Africatown or have connections. Well, so has anything been done in that?
Well, several descendants have been swabbed, and National Geographic has come in and taken samples of from the ship. I cannot imagine that DNA still exists. That's what I'm trying to. Science is beautiful. Still exists where you can possibly figure out a connection to people now from 162 years ago, and that's only going to grow. We will get better at this as we go forward. A lot of this stuff is just so new to people like me and the community people, and you know, I keep praying all the time that I haven't done anything wrong that I shouldn't have done in leading this organization for these last 3 years that can't be undone. I pray to God that I haven't, been giving away things, that's cost us money, just to be honest about it. But things as we go forward are going to get better. They're going to get better in terms of DNA testing, community testing. Right now, we have a grant that we've gotten from Alabama Power that has that we're going to do oral history. We're going up into the northern parts of the state to find descendants because they're all up there. And I just went to Grove Hill, about 70, 80 miles from here, met with a bunch of people that think that they're descendants. And so now we're going to start doing those things. And these are the kind of things that are going to come out of this. These are the things I'm talking about that are now we're turning the corner on. So get on board. Train has left the station and we're not coming back.
Well, to that note, so for Old Plateau Cemetery, someone wants to know, someone said that they have grandparents and other family members buried in Old Plateau. And is there a cemetery record of those buried there?
Well, that's another thing that we're trying to make sure we have records. How accurate they are is something that we have to discuss. I know Ms. Doris Lee has records of the cemetery. There are records, I believe, at the Historic Union Baptist Church, Brother Tucker, that has records. These are things right now that we're still trying to make sure that we're unraveling. This is pretty new stuff. And as we go forward and other people decide, hey, let me help you, we're going to get that help from other people. You know very well, Dr. Jones, that now we're getting people to say, let me help you. Let us help you. Let us document this. Let us put this database together. Let's do this. And we're like, okay, let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So are there any diaries from the original people who were enslaved on the boat? Do you have any written documentation from the original founders of the community?
I'm sure that some of the families have information. I do know that my cousin, John Bako, has a lot of information from Miss Eva Jones, mama. Aunt Eva was very adamant about teaching us things, some of us things. John knows a lot more than I know. And I keep trying to get him to tell me what he knows. And, it's kind of hard right now, but I'm working on it. And there are families like that who have that information. So it's a matter of us trying to pull them all together, and with the help of people like our new president, Mr. Ellis, who is a serious history buff, I think that we will get this done. I think we'll get it done. I'm proud of what we've done the last 3 years to get this thing down the road. Now it's time to take it to the next level.
Okay, so this is one kind of general for everybody to talk about the various, because there's multiple moving parts, but how is the descendant community being included in the archaeological process?
Well, how we've been included in the archaeological process, not the DNA testing. Well, like Jim said, when they were out there on that expedition, is that what you call it, Jim? We would talk every day. Jim would send me notes every day. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. Here's what we could, and I appreciated that, because I could, take that and do what I could do, what little I could to relate it. But, they've been very forthcoming. Jim, Stacy, National Geographic, they've been very forthcoming on what they're doing. Now, we do have questions about some things, but at least they are making an effort to include us. See, one of the things that we've got, this is Old South, one of the things we have got to make sure that we do for so long in the Old South, Black people have been told, here's what's going to happen, okay? Nobody asked us a damn thing. Now, it's about, okay, here's what we're doing. What do you guys think about this? I love it. It's really good. These are some of the things that are changing that is going to help basically trust, because there's a trust factor in Mobile, Alabama. For so long, we had regimes in this town that only cared about the lives of the rich or the lives of the white, which were usually, synonymous. And we didn't have any representation. We didn't have anybody asking us anything. And now we've got people talking to us. It's a beautiful thing. I am excited that people talk to me. I am. I really am. You laugh, but I am. Oh, Darren, what do you think? What? You want to know what I think? Here's what I think. Okay? Strap in, because here's what I think. So these are things that we need to keep working on. But to answer the question, yes, Dr. Delgado, Ben, Stacy, Dr. Hybrid from National Geographic, they keep us pretty much informed on what they're doing.
I would like to say, just for people who are interested in the project, that at the request of the community, I'm not sure if it was directly you, Darren, I think it may have been, asked that we publish something daily while we were in the field. And so every day I wrote a little paragraph about what we had accomplished, and it is still published on our website along with the photographs that were taken. So there's sort of a daily Stacy's diary of what happened every day that we were during the 2 weeks that we were in the field in May.
Yes.
That available for the public to look at.
Yes, and yes, that was me that asked for that.
Yeah. There is another
I'm
question.
Glad you did.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's another question, but I think I'm gonna end up answering this one. But are there plans to perform archaeological research in Africatown neighborhood? And so I'll be working with Darren on that aspect. And one of the things to note is that Africatown had research. So Neil Norman had actually done work in Africatown years ago. And we have the artifacts. They're located in Alabama. I'll be working along with community members to look at what are the next steps, how do they want to proceed, taking those artifacts and putting them into a digital repository as well, so that not only do we have the actual artifacts at home in Africatown, but that they're also on a digital, so that descendants, members of the larger community and the global community will also be able to access that information as well. So there are plans around the archaeological research as far as Africatown itself is concerned. And the community will very much be involved in that and that moving forward.
I should probably note that there's been some good scholarship, and two books in particular I want to call out are, first off, Dr. Natalie Robertson's book on Clotilda, and particularly on the community and the people and what can be said about where they came from in Africa, as well as Sylviane Diouf's book, which is also out and available. Both of these were very helpful. Of course, it's also been absolutely essential. You can only read so many books to get so much. It has been ongoing discussions. We're constantly learning. But I did want to call out those two scholars, as well as Dr. Durkin, for their work on this story long before any of us ever showed up.
And the publication of Barracan, I would be remiss for not mentioning fellow Alabamian from down the road here in Notasulga, Zora Neale Hurston, who was one of our nation's first female anthropologists that, and of course, a wonderful writer. There you go. Alex, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was like, we have so many questions. I was like, people are so excited and have so many. One of the things that has come up a few times is, have you seen any evidence of personal items that belong to those who were enslaved at all?
Not yet.
No, we've not seen anything that speaks to individuals at this stage. Again, everything was very limited, and it's a biopsy. Mm-hmm. And in the hold, no, we haven't seen anything that would look like that.
They were stripped of their personal items, so the opportunity for something to be there would be small anyway.
Yes.
That's one of the ways that you control people is by an induced Stockholm syndrome, is to remove their clothing and their belongings and the things that are their identity, that make up their identity.
Yeah.
And so oh, go ahead. No, Jim. Go ahead.
No, but again, further excavation may reveal more, but I would imagine that we will see more direct evidence of confinement than we will the individuals. Their legacy, as we've heard, powerfully lives on in what they related to and what they passed on in their spirit to their descendants.
And to that point, Darren, someone wants to know specifically, have descendants actively been writing down the stories that have been passed down orally from older generations?
I can't really speak to what a lot of the families have done. I know that a lot of information that we had, my family was lost in floods because they weren't kept digitally or electronically at that point. So we lost a lot of handwritten stuff in some floods that we had here in Mobile. But we're trying to recover a lot of oral history. We're trying to make sure we begin putting this oral history together. It's going to be important for the young kids coming up behind us. The Peyton Ellises, the Janas, my granddaughter. It's going to be important that these kids have information so they know how to carry on this message. It's got to be carried on. We can't let the kids not know what's what. So, yeah.
What has overall been the reaction to all of the new information being found about the Clotilda in Mobile?
The overall reaction depends on who you ask, I guess. If you go down to City Hall and ask some people, it might be different than what you'd hear in Africatown. If you go to some people in Africatown, they may say, well, that's not exactly what I know. This has been a really interesting journey. I'm not going to get away from the question. It's been a really interesting journey. The personalities that I've run across, the personalities that have come out because of this, we would like, honestly, I don't want Mobile to be Charleston, which has embraced its history of enslavement. I don't want Mobile to be Savannah, which has done the same. Lord knows Montgomery now, bastion of racism back in the day. You can't walk and step off the curb in Montgomery without getting hit by a tour bus. But I want us to be Mobile. Mobile is my home. I want Mobile to be uniquely Mobile in this. Recognize the things that have happened and let's embrace it. we can do more things here in Mobile than we've done, but it's going to take the right type of vision from the people who can help get this done to get it done. And that's what I see. That's just what I see this could be. That's just how I feel about that. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's how I feel about that.
All right. Stacy, did you want to add anything to that?
Repeat the question. I mean, I was.
Oh, no, I was going to say, what has been the reaction in Mobile to the discovery of the Clotilda from your perspective? Because getting it from two different perspectives.
Okay. My perspective, other than the being able to work with the Africatown community, which is definitely an important part of Mobile, is working with the city and their, historic development in the museum. And they've been on board since I have, the project I keep mentioning, beginning 10 years ago to be involved. These were grants, certified local government grants that the city of Mobile had applied for to do Neil Norman's work in Africatown. I think the University of South Alabama had done some preliminary work prior to that. Of course, the Museum of Mobile is behind the Heritage House Museum. So, and they're also the ones who are curating the artifacts for us because, although I feel, first of all, strongly that they be curated in, by federal standards and state standards, but also I feel like that things should reside as close to the communities of origin as possible. So we've really loved working with the Museum of Mobile and housing the artifacts that we've brought up, including our samples. And then the University of South Alabama has the artifacts from their work and from Neil Norman's work. So all of that is in Mobile. Did that answer your question?
No, that was perfect. I just wanted to get two different perspectives, and I know each person is coming from different, so you're going to get different impacts and see the different reactions in different ways.
Well, as Jim noted earlier, I'm coming at it from, I suppose, a position of privilege, but I as long as I've been involved, the city of Mobile is enthusiastically supported bringing the Africatown story to light.
Okay, so why have you? This is more of like a compliance question, more policy. So hearing how you guys, as the descendant population of Africatown, were involved with the data recovery process sounds a lot like here in California, where the Native American with Native American monitors. And I'm glad to hear that. Is there an interest or a movement within the state to get a similar law protecting enslaved community artifacts and requiring monitors in excavations impacting African-American sites?
No, as far as I know, there's no movement to get, I mean, we really don't have any state laws that mirror, I know some states have laws that mirror the National Historic Preservation Act in Section 106. We don't have one in Alabama. So we don't really have, really the only law that we have that talks about any kind of consultation is the Burial Act, and that we would consult with any communities that were involved with cemeteries or sites that we were uncovering. But I hear you, and I have thought very often of my experience in tribal consultation, and that just felt like the right thing to do here. So but beyond being the right thing to do, it's the only way to get at the real story. And in archaeology, we're trying to tell people's stories. And I just feel like it's it would be really dumb for me to come from the outside and try to tell the story of a living community that's right there, and they have their own story, and they have the agency to tell their own story. So I view it as a privilege to be able to partner with the community, as well as just being the right thing to do. And I don't think, we wouldn't have a good product. We wouldn't have a good story without, I just can't imagine doing it without the community.
I think you're also seeing here is that the way we've always answered this subject, of course, to not telling exactly where the wreck is, having said what we did earlier, certain people know, But also, while we're still going through analysis, I mean, we're not going to share an incomplete result, but as things come out, we've been very forthright in that throughout every step of this process, starting, of course, only after we've had a private discussion and meeting with as many descendants and Africatown community members that we can do that with. And that started at the very start with the wreck that was 3 times too big to be Clotilda, but just the same was treated with respect and carefully studied. And then we quietly met with everybody before we then announced that it wasn't Clotilda, to the point where we could, as Darren has noted a couple occasions to me, where we could say, yes, it is Clotilda.
Well, Jim, as you've pointed out in the past, while the Clotilda is obviously the vessel that everyone's interested in, the community of Africatown has always been tied to the port of Mobile and the water there. And so that ship's graveyard has more stories about Africatown heritage than the Clotilda itself. The Clotilda started it, but I mean, who do you think worked on those vessels? You know, who do you think were the fishermen? Who do you think were the stevedores? And you know, and then is it the Lake Ellijay, where African American troops were trained during the war? So you know that there's a long history there, and parts of it may not be as exciting to the rest of the world, but they're very important to us in order to recover and to tell those stories.
Well, exactly. And to that end, I mean, early on, we said that the wreck, the 12 Mile Island wreck, if it is the schooner Else, is a vessel that was loaded and unloaded and crewed by members of the African American community in Mobile. It has its own history and tie there. And in many cases, vessels like that were actively crewed, and not only crewed, but officered by members, you know, of the community. Lake Ellijay is a vessel that seemingly doesn't mean much until you look at its history. It was specifically set aside as a segregated training facility in New Orleans to train port battalions, largely African American units who were given the task of offloading ammunition and gear on invasion beaches under heavy enemy fire at times, but without the benefit of being armed. Exceptional moments of heroism as these folks fought with what they had learned, not only on Lake Ellijay, but from their own life experiences as they fought against the Axis, but also against systemic racism in the armed forces in which they served. And that wreck is the one that sits right next to Clotilda. So as we've noted, same old stuff, 80 years apart and 100 feet away.
So as we're wrapping up, Darren, I do have one question I want to throw at you that I thought it was of particular interest. The question is, are there any involvement from people from Africa in the Africatown project? Have you reached out to anyone specifically or had communities in Africa offering to assist, help, work, want to do research, or just connect with the community in Africatown?
Absolutely. I've had people reach out to me, sending resumes to come over here. And I'm like, Jesus, you know. And we have one of our descendants, I believe, I'm not sure if anybody's going with Delisha, but one of our descendants, Delisha Marshall, is on her way to Benin, I believe in early next year, maybe sooner than that. But she was just down here shooting a segment with National Geographic on her soon-to-be trip to Benin. So these are kind of things that are happening. I get people reach out all the time, wanting to know from Africa, wanting to know things about who we are, when are we coming there, so we can connect and that type thing. And these are things that we're planning on. We've got so much that we need to do now, and a lot of things will be coming forward as our new regime takes shape in the Clotilda Descendants Association. So I'm looking forward to that, looking forward to it in a lot of ways. Like I said, a lot of stuff is new. There's a lot of new stuff. We're figuring this all out. I know I am. Some people may have it better than me, but I'm trying to figure this out and just keep moving every day, get up every day, and try to avoid these archaeologists and these divers, man.
We're unavoidable.
I know you are. I know you are. I know you are.
All right. So with that, I would like to say, what is the best website for anybody who would like to get involved with the Clotilda, like to support, like to help? What would you recommend is the website that they should go to reach out to the Africatown community?
Well, I know you can reach out to the Clotilda Descendants Association website, and on the top of that website is all our partners, okay? All our partners are there. Chess, ACDC, I believe Move is there. You'd have to look at it, but the Clotilda, I think Mr. Ellis has already put it in the chat, theclotildastory.com, okay, is our website. And I noticed a comment here from Dr. Karen Jackson, who is kind of my mentor on a lot of stuff. We do have a professor here now at the University of South Alabama in Mobile, who is from Benin, and I met him and his wife the other day. I'm not going to try to butcher his name, but I'm going to give it a shot. I believe it's Ganamuku, okay? Dr. Ganamuku. And yes, he is here as well. So, like I said, there's a lot of new stuff happening, a lot of things that we are just now coming into, but the Clotilda Descendants website is where you can go and get information on just about every other, all of our partners that are here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Delgado, and thank you, Dr. Hawthorne, as well for participating. And thank you, everybody who sat through to listen to this interesting discussion. And I will turn it over for Ben for our closing remarks.
Hi, everyone. Just give me a second. I just wanted to share my screen quickly. I just want to take this moment to thank everybody on this panel. Dr. Jones, thank you for being host, moderator. Thank you to all our panelists for taking this time on a Saturday afternoon, on a weekend, to come in and talk to us about this this incredible story and this incredible work that all of you are doing, and especially I love seeing the cooperation between the archaeologists and the community, and that's something that at the AIA, in all the programs that we do, including our site preservation program and things, we've always sort of made community and archaeological connections the key to our projects. That's what we want to support, and that's what we want to encourage. And I love seeing this cooperation and collaboration. So thank you very much for sharing with us and for taking the time to share your knowledge, your experience, and your time with us. I also want to thank all of you all of you who are listening for joining us. Again, if you enjoyed this program and want more like it, please consider joining the AIA and support us through your generous gifts. And the information is on the screen right there, archaeological.org/donate or archaeological.org/join. And that will also help you stay up to date with all the programs that we do. We have several upcoming lectures. I'll just put a plug in for our AIA Archaeology Hour and Archaeology Abridged series. You can learn more about these lectures at archaeological.org/lectures. And finally, I just want to talk about quickly about our next program, which is coming up in November 15th and 17th. We'll be featuring Tess Davis. Oh, actually, you know what? I made a mistake. Before we get to Tess Davis, next week, we are featuring Dr. Alaka Wali from the Field Museum. Speaking about collaborations, she is talking about making a collaborative exhibit in the work that they were doing with the new Native American hall at the Field Museum. She talks about her work with Native American representatives, artists, archaeologists, community activists, all of them who came together to create this collaborative exhibit in the Field Museum. And so that's coming up on October 17th. And then again, she's doing an archaeology abridged talk on October 27th. So to find out about all those lectures, go to our site, archaeological.org/lectures. All right, again, thank you everyone for coming out here and for staying with us through this afternoon. And thank you once again to our panel. Thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. This has been wonderful.